The key turned in the lock, and I stepped inside, already tired from the drive home. I didn't expect anything except the usual half-lit hallway and maybe the faint smell of her perfume. But when the door clicked shut behind me, I saw him first, a stranger standing there with his hand on one of her bags, frozen like a thief caught in the act. She was beside him, not even pretending to be ashamed. Her chin lifted a little, her mouth tight, as if she was daring me to say something. For a second, I thought I might black out from the way my heart slammed against my ribs. But it wasn't confusion I felt. It wasn't fear. It was a hot, controlled rage that started low in my chest and spread until my hands were shaking. I looked at her and knew she'd made up her mind long before this. That she believed I'd swallow it, nod, pretend this was fine because I'd always been the steady one. My voice came out so quiet it didn't even sound like me. And then everything in the room seemed to narrow to a single point, the place where she stood, waiting for my reaction. Funny how you think you know a person inside out. You build this picture in your head, piece by piece, all the little moments you shared. You hold on to it like it's something solid, something that won't crack just because real life decides to test it. If you'd asked me 10 years ago whether Katia was the kind of woman who'd stand in my hallway with another man's hand on her luggage, I'd have laughed in your face. She was too proud for that. Too loyal, I used to think. Too much of everything to settle for something so hollow. But I guess people surprise you, in ways you never wanted to be surprised. It feels strange to rewind it all the way back to the beginning, when none of this had started yet. Back to when I was 23, and she was 22, and we were both still pretending we knew who we were. I'd just taken my first real job at the thermal power station out past the industrial park. The place was all steel beams, humming turbines, the steady low vibration of something bigger than any of us. I loved it right away, the order of it, the way problems could be solved if you just applied the right knowledge. Nothing stayed a mystery for long. Katia was finishing her environmental science degree back then. She didn't care much for the plant, called it an eyesore, said it smelled like burned wires and wasted time. But she'd still come meet me at the gates when my shift ran late, wearing that old green jacket of hers, hair pulled up in a messy knot. She'd bring me coffee in a dented thermos, stand there tapping her foot while I finished logging the day's readings. She'd tease me that I was the only man she knew who could make kilowatt hours sound interesting. Back then, her restlessness seemed harmless, almost charming. We moved into a small place over a pharmacy when we decided to save up for something better. It wasn't much, but it was ours. 2 rooms, thin walls, a kitchen that never quite smelled clean no matter how hard she scrubbed it. But on good nights, it felt like home. I still remember how she'd curl up against me on the couch, tracing her finger along my forearm, telling me about some article she'd read or a recipe she wanted to try. She had this way of making plans faster than I could keep up. Trips we never took, hobbies she lost interest in after a week. It didn't matter then. I liked that she was always imagining something. I think about those nights a lot now. Wonder if she was already searching for something else, even back then. It was little things that started to change first. The nights she'd stay out later. The way she'd leave her phone face down on the table, her smile just a bit too bright when I asked how her day went. One evening I came home to find her sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, candles lit, her laptop propped open. She looked up at me like she was expecting a fight. "Just reading," she said, her voice too light. "Don't get that look." "What look?" "That look like you're about to scold me." I set my bag down and sank into the chair across from her. The screen glowed between us, full of articles about modern relationships. Trial separations. How little freedom could supposedly save a marriage. "Why are you reading this stuff?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just curious. People change. Maybe it's not such a bad thing to question everything now and then." I didn't say much. Didn't want to make it worse. But it stuck with me that night. The way she sounded so reasonable, like she'd already made a decision and was just waiting for me to agree. After that, the topic kept coming up in little ways. Jokes about friends who'd taken breaks and come back stronger. Hints that she felt trapped sometimes, like we'd settled too young. I tried to tell myself it was normal, that everyone wondered if they'd picked the right life. But the distance kept growing. One Friday, after I'd pulled a 14-hour shift, I came home to a note on the counter. "Went out with Dasha and the girls. Don't wait up." I poured a drink, sat at the table, and tried not to imagine what the girls meant. Maybe it really was just Dasha. Maybe it was something else. My phone buzzed with a message from her around midnight. "Hope your day wasn't too awful. I'm thinking about everything. I'll explain soon." I read it 3 times, trying to hear her voice in the words, trying to decide if it was a warning. The next morning, she made coffee like nothing had happened. She was all bright chatter about her night out, some bar I'd never heard of, people I didn't know. I watched her moving around the kitchen, wondering when she'd started seeming like a guest in our home. That day, she finally said it outright. "I think I need some time," she told me, her eyes fixed on her mug. Not forever. Just space. I asked her what that meant. She said she didn't know yet. She needed to figure herself out. And I said the one thing I could say and still feel like I had any pride left. If you need space, take it. But don't expect me to be here waiting if you decide it wasn't worth it. She nodded. Like she'd been expecting that too. Looking back, I don't know why I tried so hard to stay calm. Maybe part of me hoped she'd come back to her senses. Maybe I didn't want to admit how far she'd already drifted. The weeks that followed felt like waiting for something to snap. She stayed out later. She stopped bothering to hide her phone. Some nights she didn't come home at all. And still, I told myself it was just a phase. That she'd come back, apologize, swear it was nothing serious. But the night I opened that door and saw her standing beside another man, my illusions finally collapsed. And standing there, I knew there was no fixing it. You'd think that moment, coming home to find her with another man, would be the worst of it. But the truth is, the aftermath is what does you in. The silence after she walked out with him. The hours I spent standing in the kitchen because I couldn't figure out where else to go. I remember dropping my keys on the counter and just staring at the front door. My hands were still shaking. It was like my body hadn't caught up to the fact that it was over. That the line I'd drawn months before had been crossed in a way that didn't leave room for explanations. I don't know how long I stood there. The lights in the hall were still on, the shadows of our coats on the rack stretching across the tile like they were pointing at me, reminding me that this was what I'd signed up for when I let her have space. A part of me wanted to grab her things right then and throw them into the street. But I couldn't bring myself to do it yet. Not because I still had hope by then, that hope was dead. It was something else, a kind of numbness that made everything feel too heavy to lift. The first thing I did was text her. My thumb hovered over the screen so long the phone dimmed twice before I typed anything. Don't come back tonight. That was all I sent. And I turned the phone off after. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. My supervisor asked if I was feeling all right, said I looked pale. I told him it was just a stomach bug. Nobody needs to know when your personal life has fallen apart. It doesn't help anything. Doesn't change the fact that the turbines still need monitoring. That the readings still have to be logged. The station was quiet that day, almost soothing in its routine. I've always liked the hum of the machinery. It has a way of drowning out your thoughts if you stand close enough. Around noon, I checked my phone. She'd sent 6 messages. Can we talk? You didn't even give me a chance to explain. This isn't what you think. Please. I'm coming by after work. I'm sorry. I read them all once, put the phone face down on the console, and went back to work. When I finally went home that evening, she wasn't there. The living room looked exactly the way it had when I left it, just cleaner somehow, emptier. Like she'd already started to disappear from it. I sat down at the table and looked around, taking in the little details I hadn't noticed in a long time. The photo of us from that trip to Lake Seliger, propped on the shelf behind the kettle. The way her mug was still sitting in the sink. The scarf she always wore in winter, draped over the back of a chair. It hit me all at once, how much of my life had been wrapped up in hers. How many little pieces of her were scattered through my routine. And then, almost without thinking, I stood up and started gathering her things. The scarf, the mug, the cosmetics in the bathroom, her books piled on the nightstand. I stacked them in boxes, one by one, trying not to think too hard about each item. It felt mechanical, like cleaning up after someone who'd moved out weeks ago. Somewhere between the second and third box, my phone buzzed again. Katia, are you home? I'm outside. I closed my eyes, took a long breath, and typed back. Leave. I'll bring your things to your mother's place. Her reply came almost instantly. Don't do this. Please. Just talk to me. I didn't answer. I turned the phone off again. I worked through the weekend. Volunteered for every overtime shift they'd give me. Anything to avoid going home. Monday night, I came back to find an envelope shoved under the door. No note, just the key I'd given her when we first moved in. I don't know why that hit me harder than everything else. Maybe because it was final. Maybe because it was the first thing she'd done that felt honest. I picked up the key, set it on the table, and realized I hadn't eaten since the day before. That's the thing nobody tells you about moments like this. You expect some big confrontation, some screaming match that ends with closure. But most of the time, it's just a slow, quiet dismantling of everything you thought you had. The next day, she tried calling again. And again. Each voicemail sounded a little more desperate. Ilya, please, you have to let me explain. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I'm not saying I did everything right, but you're acting like I'm a stranger. I thought you understood me better than anyone. Maybe I did, once. Maybe that was the problem. By Wednesday, she switched tactics. The messages turned cold. If you won't talk to me, maybe we should just end it formally. I'm tired of feeling like the villain here. You were never willing to grow. I read that last one 3 times, feeling something twist in my chest. I'd been willing to grow. I'd been willing to compromise, to give her space. But there was a difference between growth and self-betrayal. Between being flexible and letting someone treat you like you didn't matter. I wasn't going to pretend I was okay with it. That Friday, I packed the rest of her clothes, folded them into her suitcases, the same ones we'd used on our trips back when things were simple. I loaded them into the back of my car without ceremony. Driving over to her mother's place felt surreal, like I was delivering a package for someone I barely knew. Her mother answered the door, her face pinched with worry. "She's not here," she said softly. "I know," I told her. I can't do this anymore." Her eyes filled with something that looked like pity. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I set the suitcases inside the hallway, straightened up, and looked her in the eye. "I'm not bringing them back," I said. "Please tell her that." She nodded. Didn't try to argue. Maybe she'd seen this coming longer than I had. When I got back to my car, I sat there a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing in and out until my pulse slowed. It didn't feel like triumph. It didn't even feel like relief. Just an emptiness I knew I'd be carrying for a while. The following week, she sent one more message. "I understand if you never want to see me again, but I wish you'd let me explain. I never meant to hurt you." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. And when the quiet settled over the apartment again, I realized I preferred it that way. It's strange how quickly you can get used to the absence of someone you once thought you couldn't live without. At first, the apartment felt hollow, like a stage after the actors had all gone home. Every surface reminded me she'd been here, that most of my days for the last years had revolved around her. But with each week that passed, the silence started to feel less like a threat and more like a relief. I filled the space with small routines, simple things to keep my mind steady. I'd come home from the plant, kick off my boots by the radiator, and scrub my hands until the smell of oil and steel was gone. Sometimes I'd sit in the kitchen long after the food went cold, just listening to the hum of the old refrigerator and thinking about nothing in particular. Some nights I still expected her key to turn in the lock, like she'd come back and pretend the last months hadn't happened. But as the days stretched on, that expectation faded into something dull and heavy, a memory I could set aside when I needed to. One evening, maybe a month after I'd left her things at her mother's place, I got home to find an envelope wedged in the doorframe. Inside was a single sheet of paper in her handwriting. "Ilya, I know you don't want to hear from me. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. Not because you're angry, though I know you are, but because I didn't respect what we had. I thought I needed more. Maybe I still do, but I never wanted it to end this way. I'll leave you alone now. Katya." I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer where we used to keep spare batteries and old receipts. I didn't know why I kept it. Maybe because it felt like proof that it had all been real, that she had cared once, even if it wasn't enough. After that, she mostly stopped trying to contact me. I heard through mutual friends that she was staying with someone new, that she was telling people she was happier now, freer. Maybe she was. I didn't care to check. The station was in the middle of its annual maintenance cycle, which meant 12-hour shifts and not much time to think. I took every extra hour they offered me. It wasn't just about the money, though it helped. It was about feeling like I was still useful, still building something solid when everything else had cracked apart. My supervisor, an old guy named Volkov, started asking if I was all right. He'd clap me on the shoulder in that gruff way and say, "You know you can take some time if you need it." I'd just shake my head. "I'm fine." Because what was I supposed to do? Sit at home and replay every conversation we'd ever had? Wonder which moment had been the turning point. No thanks. On weekends, when the shifts were shorter, I started spending more time at the old dacha my grandfather had left me. The place was falling apart at the edges, roof shingles missing, the front steps creaking under my boots, but I liked it better than any neat apartment. It was honest in its decay. There was something satisfying about chopping wood until my arms ached or clearing out the garden beds that had gone to seed. Manual work doesn't leave much room for regret. One Saturday, I drove out early, before the sun was fully up. The road was still damp from the night's rain, and the fields on either side looked almost silver in the morning light. For the first time in months, I caught myself humming under my breath. It didn't mean everything was fixed, but it was something. That evening, I stopped at the generator repair shop on my way back. I'd been meaning to get a replacement part for the old petrol generator that kept the dacha lights running. The place was half warehouse, half office. Rows of shelves stacked with parts, the air thick with the smell of grease and metal filings. She was behind the counter, sorting invoices into a battered blue folder. When she looked up, she gave me a small, polite smile, the kind you give a stranger who's about to ask for help. "Hi," I said, a little awkward. "I called about a fuel valve for a Vector 2000? Right." She flipped through the folder, pulled out a slip. "I set it aside this morning." Her voice was soft, but clear. Not the kind of voice that tried to fill the space with noise. Just straightforward. I watched her hands as she wrapped the part in brown paper. No ring on her finger, no bright nail polish. Just clean, capable hands that looked like they'd never had time for vanity. "Thanks," I said when she slid it across the counter. "No problem." She met my eyes for a second, then looked down again. If you need help installing it, let me know. It's a common issue with that model. I nodded. I might take you up on that. It was a short conversation. Nothing special. But when I got back in my car, I realized my heart felt a little lighter. Like maybe not every interaction had to end with disappointment. Over the next few weeks, I kept working, kept putting one foot in front of the other. I'd still think about Katia sometimes, usually late at night, when the apartment was too quiet and the wind rattled the balcony door. But it wasn't the same kind of hurt. More like an old bruise, tender but no longer raw. Some evenings, I'd catch myself remembering the good parts. The night she'd fall asleep on my shoulder. The way she'd dance barefoot in the kitchen when she thought I wasn't watching. Other times, I'd remember her standing in that hallway with a stranger and feel the heat rush back into my throat. I guess that's how it goes. You don't ever forget. You just learn to live around it. About a month after I first met her at the shop, I saw her again. Lena, her name was on the invoice she'd given me. I was driving past late one evening when I noticed the lights still on. I don't know why I pulled in. Maybe because I wasn't ready to go home to an empty apartment. Maybe because I just wanted to see a face that didn't look at me with pity or blame. She looked up when I stepped inside, surprised but not annoyed. Working late? I asked, nodding at the stack of paperwork. She laughed softly. Always. It's inventory week. Need coffee? I heard myself say. She tilted her head, studying me like she was deciding if I'm in it. Then she smiled small, but real. Sure, if you don't mind. So I went across the street to the little kiosk, bought 2 cheap coffees and paper cups, and came back. We sat on opposite sides of the counter, drinking in quiet. It wasn't a date. Wasn't anything, really. But it felt good to sit there, just breathing the same air as someone who didn't know all my failures. When I finally stood to leave, she touched my wrist lightly. Thank you, she said. For the coffee. For just being normal. Anytime, I told her. And I meant it. On the drive home, I thought about how strange it was that the smallest kindness could feel like a fresh start. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself hope that maybe I wasn't as broken as I'd feared. After that night with the coffee, it got easier to stop by the shop every now and then. Sometimes I needed parts for the dacha. Sometimes I didn't need anything at all. I'd pull in after work, pretending it was just convenient, but I think we both knew better. Lena never made a big deal out of it. She'd smile, slide the little folding chair out from behind the counter, and we'd sit in that quiet, well-scented space, just talking. It was never about anything important. She'd tell me about her brother's farm out near Voronezh, or complain about the shipment delays. I'd talk about the power station, how the old systems never cooperated, how every time you fixed one leak, 2 more sprang up. Simple things. But somehow, those conversations felt like the safest part of my week. Katia didn't reach out for a while. Maybe she thought the silence meant I was finally softening, that I was letting the dust settle so she could try again. I wish I could say I never thought about it, never wondered if there was something to salvage. But I'd be lying. There were nights when the emptiness in my apartment felt too heavy, when I'd catch myself replaying old memories, trying to pick out the exact moment it had all gone wrong. But every time, the same picture came back, her standing in that hallway, her eyes daring me to accept something I never agreed to. That memory was enough to keep me steady. One evening, about 3 months after everything ended, I was locking up the dacha when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. For a moment, I thought it might be Lena. We'd exchanged numbers, though neither of us had used them much yet. But it wasn't her. It was Katia. Ilya, please. Just hear me out. No introduction. No apology. Just that. I stared at the screen, feeling the same old tightness coil up in my chest. But this time, it faded almost as soon as it came. I typed back. There's nothing left to hear. She didn't answer right away. I turned off my phone and drove home. The sky washed pale pink behind the tree line. The next day, she tried again. A string of messages, one after the other. I made mistakes, I know. I thought you'd understand me better than anyone. Nobody else ever made me feel safe. I don't want this to be the end. I didn't reply. Later that night, when I checked again, there was one more. The man you saw, he's not who I thought he was. He's already moved on. And I'm here trying to pick up the pieces alone. I read that one twice. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. But it passed. I powered the phone off and set it face down on the table. Around that time, Lena started texting me little updates. Nothing personal at first. Just polite messages about orders I'd placed. Your fuel valve came in. I can hold it for you. If you need help installing the coupling, let me know. I always wrote back to thank her. Sometimes we'd trade a few lines. Short, friendly, no expectations. But every time her name lit up my screen, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement. Not even hope. Just a kind of quiet that settled over me like a warm blanket. One Thursday, I was running late from the plant. A relay had failed during testing, and it took hours to get the readings back in range. By the time I got to the shop, Lena was already closing up. Sorry, I said, a little breathless. I should have called. She smiled, flipping the lock back open. It's fine. You want to come in for a minute? We sat on the stools by the counter, sipping the instant coffee she kept in a tin behind the till. The place smelled like dust and engine grease, but it felt more welcoming than any bar or restaurant I could think of. I asked her how long she'd worked there. She told me almost 6 years. I was only supposed to help my uncle out for a few months, she said, rubbing her thumb over the rim of her cup. But I guess I stayed. You like it? She shrugged. It's honest work. People don't expect you to pretend here. I knew what she meant. When I left that night, she walked me to the door. For a second, we just stood there, neither of us moving. See you soon, she said quietly. And the funny thing was, I believed it. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more often. Sometimes I'd bring her pastries from the bakery near the plant. Sometimes she'd send me a photo of a new shipment with a note. Thought you might need this eventually. It wasn't anything big, but it was something steady. One evening, I found myself telling her about the way everything had fallen apart. Not the ugly details, just enough so she'd understand why I sometimes went quiet when she asked about my past. She listened without interrupting, her expression calm, her hands folded on the counter. When I finished, she didn't say anything about blame or forgiveness. Instead, she just nodded and said, "That must have been hard." And it was the first time I felt like I didn't have to defend myself. About a week later, I was walking back from the corner store when I saw Katia standing outside my building. She looked smaller than I remembered, pale, her hair pulled back too tight, as if she'd stopped caring how she looked. "Ilya," she said as soon as she spotted me. I didn't slow my steps. "I just need 5 minutes," she said quickly, falling into step beside me. "Please." I let out a breath, my hand tightening around the bag of groceries. 5 minutes, I said finally. That's it. She looked relieved, but her eyes were tired. She followed me to the little bench by the entrance. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she began, her voice low. I need you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it." I didn't say anything. She swallowed, glancing away. "You were right. About everything. The people I thought would make me feel free, they didn't care. They just wanted someone who'd be grateful for scraps." I studied her face. The same face I'd loved for so long, only now it looked unfamiliar, worn down, uncertain. "I lost the best person in my life," she whispered. "And I don't even expect you to believe that. But it's true." I let the words hang between us. Then I stood up. "I believe you." Just done. After that conversation on the bench, I did the last piece of something breaking loose and drifting away for good. I won't pretend to wake up and still expect to hear her moving around in the kitchen. Some evenings, I'd catch myself reaching to tell her something mundane about my day. But the impulse faded faster each time. What surprised me was how much room there was in my life without to feel like myself again. Room to let something new grow, slowly, without all the old expectations hanging over it. After all the noise and drama I'd lived through, it felt good to let things unfold in their own time. We'd meet for coffee after she closed up the shop. Sometimes from the storeroom, or she'd drive out to the dacha to see the repairs I'd finally started tackling. She never asked me to talk about Katia, and I never asked about who hurt her before. There was an unspoken agreement between us. The past belonged to the past. We didn't need to pick at the scars to prove we had them. I remember one evening in early autumn, standing with her on the porch of the dacha as the sun dipped behind the trees. We didn't say much, just watched the light fade and felt the chill of the air creep in. When she slipped her hand into mine, it wasn't some big declaration. It was quiet, sure, almost ordinary. But I think that's what made it matter. A few weeks later, I was back at the plant after a text from her. "If you're not too tired, I made soup. Come by if you want." I almost laughed, standing there in the locker room with the smell of oil clinging to my clothes. Nobody had cooked anything for me in a long time. It felt like an invitation to something simple and good, nothing complicated behind it. I drove straight there. When she opened the door, her hair was loose around her face, and for the first time, I realized I didn't feel like I was trespassing in someone else's story. We ate at her small kitchen table. Potato soup, bread, nothing fancy. She told me about her day, suppliers being late, the heater in the back office giving out. I listened, grateful for the ordinariness of it all. After dinner, she walked me to the door. For a moment, we just stood there, neither of us wanting to be the first to move. "You're good company," she said finally, almost shy. "So are you." It wasn't love yet. Maybe not even close. But it was honest. And after everything, that felt like enough. Months passed. Winter came early that year, the first snow dusting the dacha roof in late October. I spent most weekends out there, fixing the things I'd put off for too long. Sometimes Lena came along, hauling scrap wood or handing me tools without being asked. Other times, she stayed in town, and I liked that too, knowing we could be together without needing to cling to each other every second. One Sunday, I was patching the back fence when my phone buzzed. For a second, my chest tightened, old reflexes making me brace for some message I didn't want. But it wasn't Katia. It never was anymore. It was Lena. Picked up that gasket you needed. Left it by your door. No rush. I set the phone down, feeling something settle in me I hadn't felt in years. A calm acceptance that this was my life now. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. No more wondering who was telling the truth. Just days, one after another, filled with work and small kindnesses. I still ran into Katia once more. It was late November, early evening, and I'd stopped by the supermarket to pick up groceries. She was in the produce aisle, squinting at a pile of oranges. She didn't see me right away. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, her face drawn in a way that made her look older. When she finally looked up and our eyes met, she froze. "Ilya," she said, her voice a little hoarse. "Katia." She looked down, fussed with the hem of her coat. "I'm not going to make a scene," she said quietly. I think about you sometimes. About us." I didn't reply. There wasn't much left to say. She swallowed. None of it turned out how I thought. The people I thought would be better for me, they weren't. They wanted everything from me but never gave anything back. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment, I almost saw the girl I loved. "I know I don't have the right to say this," she went on, voice low, "but you were the best thing I had. And I ruined it." I nodded slowly. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said. A flicker of something, regret, maybe, passed over her face. Then she looked away. I turned and walked to the checkout, my heart steady in my chest. There was no satisfaction in it, no triumph. Just the knowledge that whatever held me to her had finally let go. That night, I drove out to the dacha, the sky thick with stars overhead. I built a small fire in the old stove, sat in the armchair by the window, and let the quiet sink in. I thought about everything we'd been, everything we'd lost. And then I thought about what waited for me now, work I cared about, a woman whose company felt easy, and a life that finally felt like my own. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's burdens. I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to collapse. I just felt free.